So the key thing to keep remembering, as we've been talking about all the time with the mind, we've got these delusions and we have the virtues. We have delusions and we have invalid cognitions and valid cognitions, basically. When we learn that in high school, you get so familiar with this that it's much easier then to understand how ego grasping functions as a liar. But these states of mind embellish what is there. They decorate on top of what is there characteristics that aren't there. When we understand that about attachment and anger, then we can understand it about ignorance, which is a more subtle mistake, that's all. It's a more subtle mistake. And only because we're so addicted to these states of mind, they're ancient, that's all. We come programmed with them in the second of conception. Hugely ancient, deeply in our bones. So they're the lenses through which we see the whole world. And all we've been talking about the whole 5 days is how to recognize those misconceptions and go past them and see things from the perspective of virtue and wisdom, which brings compassion in the end. And the more strongly they're in our mind, the more fear, the more panic, the more misery, the more anxiety, the more depression, the more suffering. That's it. That's the direct relationship for the Buddha. That's what he's identified as the main cause of all suffering. That implies the job, working on the mind. That's it. That's the essence of it. And how they cause suffering and why. So this is the thing to understand why they can be removed from the mind. This is the point. So when we think of the mind as the brain, this concept just sounds so bizarre. It's meaningless. It's just a meaningless idea that you can get rid of all the delusions. It's just plain bizarre. Because it was clear we don't cut pieces of the brain out, you know. So we're not discussing that. We're discussing viewpoints. We're discussing cognitions. Viewpoints, opinions. I mean, that's why it's even very helpful to even think about how we're divided up into sensory consciousness and mental consciousness. When you study Buddhist psychology, you study, first of all, the epistemological model of the mind. You know, you study, there's a text called Lorig, means mind and awareness. And there's 2 parts to it. You study the epistemological model of the mind, which is how the mind functions. And this is beyond fascinating. We're not discussing the brain, remember. We're discussing the way the mind functions. It's absolutely astonishing. You know, it's quite remarkable, quite fascinating. And then you study the psychological model, which is how we've been discussing the contents of our mental consciousness. So from the epistemological point of view, we've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. So it's really important to see the stark difference. So because we make the body the boss, we don't really think this, we don't do this analysis, you know. This is a really powerful point. So so then we've got sensory consciousness, mental consciousness. So sensory consciousness, and spelling it out, means that part of our mind, because consciousness and mind are synonymous, which remember is not physical. So eye consciousness, for example, we just think it's the eyeball. No, the eye consciousness is that part of our mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball and all the little bits and pieces to enable us to have a cognition. So, and then ear consciousness, same. That part of our mind that functions through the medium of the ear, the drum, all the bits and pieces. So those parts of our mind, the sensory consciousnesses, you know, there's different ways of describing, but basically they're very limited in their capacity for cognition. And this is where we so make mistakes. So eye consciousness has only all parts of our mind cognize something. They're the subject, and whatever they cognize is called the object of that consciousness, of that moment of cognition. And that's where we're learning here to get this kind of clarity about the mind, about all our different mental states, to try and work out what objects we're cognizing and are they valid or not. That's what we're trying to do. So with the sensory consciousnesses, eye consciousness, for example, has only got 2 objects that it can cognize: shape and color. That's it. So this is the really interesting point. So when I look at that cup, and I might just say, what a pretty cup. So we naturally assume my I consciousness is cognizing a pretty cup. If I'm in love with Chuck, my eyes see we think our eyes see a really handsome person. Well, Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. I consciousness can only cognize that shape and color. I've heard that they do say there are other levels of it, but this is just keeping it at a very basic level, okay? That the senses have their own objects of cognition. And in the I consciousness level, it cognizes shape and color. That's it. So then you have to ask the question, what part of my mind is cognizing a pretty cup? Well, that's our mental consciousness. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa puts it. And this is how interesting it is. So because I'm familiar with this, it's all stored in my mind from my memory, it's all stored there. What happens is, the millisecond my eye consciousness, goes onto that shape there and color, that same millisecond, what happens, and I really mean this sincerely, quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed and the information comes out based on my taste, my memory, my this and my that. What a pretty cup. But it's like in a millionth of a second, it's simultaneous. But that's from the mental consciousness. So basically, when we go to the mental consciousness, which is where the workshop is, that's what our job is, to start to unpack and unravel this and say all the contents of there. And basically, everything in the mental consciousness, at the level we function in day-to-day life, is at the level of concepts. And again, in the epistemological model, we only have two ways of cognizing. They call it conceptual, which is the gross level of mental consciousness in day-to-day life, and then the other one is called perception. That's a very specific definition in Buddhist psychology. So in terms of the mental consciousness, we have conceptuality and we have perception. So we only have perception in subtle meditation, and it's necessarily beyond conceptual. So effectively, we don't have that at all in our daily lives. And this is kind of abstract for us, it's not how we talk, but it's non-conceptual. We don't even have a level of non-conceptuality. We don't even think like that in our mental consciousness. So only when we've got concentration and we've got, as Lama's talking, and you go beyond conceptuality and beyond the sensory, it's then when you have what they call perception, and it's at that level that we can have, as they call it, direct perception of things. The actual experiential knowledge about emptiness, the experiential knowledge of impermanence. That's at a perception level, beyond conceptual. That's why we need concentration. So at the level of living in day-to-day life, in our mental consciousness, we have the mental consciousness is full of these millions of thoughts. And a thought is an idea, it's a viewpoint, it's an opinion. And all Buddha's doing is dividing those opinions into valid ones and invalid ones. That's another way of putting it. So we've got to sort out the facts from the fiction. That's our job as a Buddhist. So, when we talk about the mind in our culture, we talk about feelings and we point to our heart. Then when we talk concepts, we point to our head. But for the Buddha, they're all the same. They all come down to being conceptually based. That the thing is, some of our conceptions, which we have an emotional component, and because they're the ones connected to the ego grasping, attachment, anger, anxiety, jealous, depression, they're fierce emotional component. And then we only notice those when they get to the level of emotion and they get to the level where our body is affected. We don't notice them at a subtler level, which is why we have to unpack and unravel our mind with concentration and go to a deeper level of our mind to get to hear all these conceptual stories that inform our emotions. But we only notice when the emotions, and that's when the wheels are falling off. It's just too late. So that's why we have to have concentration, and we have to have this model, if we choose, and then we look more deeper to see the conceptual stories before they get to the level of emotion, because then it's too late to deal with them. So anger and that's the analysis we have to do. So let's listen. If we look at the attachment and anger and the relationship they have with each other, we have to analyze what are the concepts, what are the stories, what are the opinions, what are they saying? So what does attachment say? Well, mainly it says, I want. This huge, massive, hungry, emotional hunger based on the assumption I don't have. I want, I expect, So major function of attachment is expectation. So I'm in love with Chuck. I don't realize it. I've made up this I've written this elaborate novel in my head, all about what I want him based on what I don't feel I have, so I dump those needs onto him, and then I expect him to, this is all what attachment's saying. He will give me happiness. He will do what I want every second. He will make me happy. That's a broad way of saying what attachment's saying. That's what it's saying. It's a concept. But in broad terms, it's exaggerating his role in my happiness. It's exaggerating his deliciousness and his role in my life. This is all the highly elaborate conceptual story, but completely implied because it's at a subtle emotional level and we're so familiar with it. Then, the moment he doesn't fulfill my needs, then anger arises. So what's anger say? Anger says, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. So what attachment is also saying is, I deserve it. So the real energy, there's a hubris of attachment and anger. That there's an assumption of I deserve. This is massive. There's an assumption that I deserve happiness, and then it's his job to do it for me. That's when we get enraged when he doesn't, because I don't deserve that. How dare he do that to me? They're the philosophies of attachment and aversion. They're philosophies, they're viewpoints deeply ingrained in our minds. That's what we have to unpack. Get past the emotional component of the body. That's just a symptom. The real work is hearing those concepts and then arguing with them because they're not valid. What do you mean I don't deserve? Who said? According to what law? And what do I mean I deserve? This is where, attachment and aversion, these two simple words, these run our lives. And they're the main voices of the ego grasping, the outcropping of ego grasping. So the deepest one is I deserve happiness. That's why we're so enraged when it doesn't come. So it's kind of arrogant. What do you mean you deserve it? Who says? According to what law? Deserve is a dependent phenomenon. It's like I use the example. You know, this is a powerful point. You look in your bank account, it's your bank account. Your bank account. So you don't say, I deserve dollars. You know the dollars that'll be there will only be the dollars that you work to put in there. So you deserve them, yes you do, if you earned them. Then you deserve dollars, yes. But to say, blanketly, I deserve dollars, that's bizarre. But that's how we feel. That's the hubris of ego. It's no basis, no meaning. We all assume we deserve a perfect mother. I don't know why we think that. That's why we're so shocked when our mum turns out to be less than perfect. That's why people want to murder their mothers. The amount of literature on memoirs of people who loathe and hate their mothers. They're the cause of all their suffering. The rage. It's so astonishing. I deserve a perfect mother. Who says? Deserve is a dependent arising. You deserve dollars if you earn them. If you look in your garden, you don't say, I deserve. Who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. When you know it's your garden, you would. This is the point. When you own the garden as yours, you know the flowers that are there are the ones you planted. So yeah, you deserve those flowers, baby. And if the weeds are there, you deserve them too because you didn't pull them out. So it's an ownership that comes. And we know this naturally with our life. But this is what we don't feel when it comes to the fundamental stuff, because we assume either God made us or mummy made us. They're the philosophies we live by. We just believe they're true. No, we haven't proved it. We just believe it. Someone told us. You'd never think about God if someone hadn't told you. If you never knew about how babies are conceived, you wouldn't know your mother made you. We just believe. We think we're so scientific, we're so ignorant. We haven't proved it. And then there's assumption, I deserve it. This is the hubris of these delusions. And the Buddha says it's all based on this ego grasping, this arrogant sense of a separate I that's concrete and solid, not dependent. And it's self-pity. It's completely self-pity. Lama actually calls ego self-pity me. It's perfect. The outrage of it. So you deserve. So this is why the view of karma is so powerful if you want to use it. There's a logic for what you get. Your life is your garden. So when you have the view of karma, you don't get angry. My friend Jigdrol, this Tibetan monk, this is like 30 years ago, he was telling me about how he, was in the 87, the first mini uprising since 59, and all the young monks and nuns were demonstrating, and he was arrested, then tortured, then released, and he escaped, and his brother murdered, father murdered, blah blah. And he was telling me, and he was sort of sad. And I said casually, "Do you ever get angry, Jigdrol?" And he laughed. Angry? What for? It's our own fault, he said. Meaning, that's a person who understands karma. He knows that would be silly. Anger, to say, how dare you do that to me, I don't deserve it, is a plain, silly, stupid idea if you have the view of karma. It's like saying you don't deserve flowers. Weeds, what a joke. Of course you do, they're yours. That's when it's so deeply ingrained. That's the Tibetan view. They've been brought up with since they're born. That's their assumption about life. So whatever comes, you know it's yours. You caused it. So you don't get angry. How silly. You work with it. This is shocking to our ears. Because we have, and this is even, I'm not being sort of fundamentalist about our scientific view. It's fantastic what science has done. But this view that you didn't ask to get born, that your mother and father literally created you and gave you anger and jealousy and hate and love. That's, for me, the more I hear the Buddhist view, the more bizarre that view is from my mind. It's the wackiest thing I've ever heard. I don't mean to sound silly, just saying. So the view of karma, you don't have a view of deserve. You don't have a view of anger or attachment. They're based on misconceptions. They're based on some self-existent me that has no causes. It's just a bizarre idea. That's why we suffer so terribly. That's why there's so much anger and pain and suffering and anxiety and jealous and rage and hurt and fear, because of these misconceptions. We have to unpack them like this, analyze them, listen to the story, question it. This is the type of work we have. This is being your own therapist. And they're so instinctive. That's why it's so hard to hear them. And it's layer by layer by layer. You can't leap into the deep end. You've got to let it go, strip away slowly, you know. And this is why just having mindfulness, having concentration is not enough. It's like nihilism. There's a lot of common misconceptions about meditation in the West, you know. I remember these very kind people, some place I was, doesn't matter which country, who were working with people in prison. Very kind, dear people, helping them meditate. And, you know, they learn their meditation in different ways. And one of them, she was talking about how she was explaining what the meditation was. She got them to concentrate and then to start to observe the mind, which is what Buddha asks. And one of the levels of this is you merely observe. There's anger, there's jealousy. That's fantastic. You've got to do that. You've got to do that. Like in your garden, you've got to say there's a weed, there's a herb, there's a flower. You've got to say that first. You've got to recognise what's there based on botany. Here you're looking at Buddha's botany. You've got to recognise what's there. And then I said, well, what's your next step? Oh no, don't do anything, you just observe it. Well, that's insanity. That's nihilism. Like, there's no meaning to that. I said, well, that's interesting. So you're driving on the road and you're observing, you're driving in the wrong lane. I'm driving in the wrong lane. What do you do about it? Oh, nothing. Excuse me, you make a bloody decision. You have a meaning. When you say there is a flower and there is a weed, there's a meaning in that. Otherwise it's just nihilism. Why bother? Who cares? When you have the meaning, you know a weed is a thing you pull out and a flower is a thing you grow. That's the real work. But this is this nihilistic view about the mind. And our trouble is, in modern psychology, we don't like to sound judgmental. That sounds like judgment. Oh, you can't say that's anger, you should change it. No, that's naughty. That's nihilism. You've got to have an opinion of what anger is. You've got to have an opinion of what a weed is. If there isn't an opinion to be had, don't worry about seeing a weed or a flower. Who cares? What's the point? It is a good start to see the mind and no judge, just observe. That's fantastic. You've got to do that. That's a good practice in daily life, to step back and just simply observe. There it is, not feed into it. That's fantastic. But finally, you've got to learn to remove it. You've got to learn to understand what it is, how it functions, what its story is, what its philosophy is, and how it's not a valid cognition. That's the deeper understanding of it. It can't just disappear overnight, like flit away into space. When you're in concentration, it won't be there. That's fantastic. But when you come back out of concentration, it'll just come right back until you start doing the deeper work. We don't like judgment. You know, it sounds like judgment. No, I can't say I'm driving in the wrong lane. That sounds like I might get guilty. Excuse me. Make a decision, please. And that's why when we understand emptiness, that negativity is also empty. This is shocking to us because we hear it means therefore it doesn't matter. No. It's a dependent arising. So because it's a dependent arising, there's no neurosis, there's no guilt. You know you can change it. We get guilty because we think it's set in stone and you're being mean to somebody when you judge, you know. But anger is a dependent arising. It's an assumption, it's a viewpoint, it's a conception, it's an opinion, it's a philosophy. We've got to unpack it and see that it has no validity. Then, of course, because we conflate anger with justice and compassion, we think we throw the baby out with the bathwater and end up not caring when we see suffering. No, that's also extreme. That's bizarre. As Martin Luther King said, it's good to be angry, good to find fault, but then you say, what can I do to help? How can I fix it? That's fantastic. So in day-to-day, this is the day-to-day work we have to do, to go beyond the feeling and get to hear the story anger is saying, that jealousy is saying, that pride is saying, that low self-esteem is saying. It's a conceptual story. But we're so familiar with it only at the level of feeling, and that's when the body's involved, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have to go beneath that. And then that's what we hear. So what is the logic then for the Buddha's whole point that delusions are adventitious, which means they're not at the core of our being, which means they can be removed from our mind. It's only when we understand how they're conceptual stories that you know you can change conceptual stories. That's another way of saying you can get rid of them. It's not complicated. In other words, you know, if I see that colour there on the lid and I say it's pink, and you know, and you say, don't be silly, Robina, it's blue. I go, oh, you're right, I forgot. Well, it is pink is a concept, right? It's a thought in my mind. We agree, don't we? And then it is blue is another thought. They're both equal in being conceptions, thoughts, opinions about something. It happens to be in the world, conventionally, the valid thought is blue because we've all agreed conventionally between us. We've all shaken hands and agreed that that is called blue in English. It's a conventional truth. We agree that's called blue. So I had the thought first, it is pink. We've all agreed that's an invalid concept. That's an invalid cognition. It is not accurate. It is a misconception. It doesn't have a valid basis here. So then you tell me it's blue, and I'm not attached to its being pink. I just forgot. I got the wrong word. So I fix it. So now the question is this. They're both thoughts. We agree they're both thoughts. They're equal in being thoughts. And we agree that one is a valid cognition and one is not a valid cognition. So then first I had the invalid cognition, then I heard the other one, and then I agreed with you. So now in my mind is the cognition, it is blue. So what happened to the previous cognition? That's the question now. Where is that cognition gone? What happened to it? It's a very simple question. What happened to it? Where is it now? It's a simple question. Where is it now, that concept? It is pink. Does it exist in my mind anymore? Does it exist in my mind anymore? You said yes.
Disappeared. No, disappeared.
So it's not just disappeared, it's completely gone, hasn't it? It's left my mind. So that meant I removed from my mind a misconception. Do we agree with that? That proves you can become a Buddha. Because the misconceptions, I am self-existent, is not true. So when we get to the deepest level, we can remove that misconception. That's when you realize emptiness. That's why delusions are adventitious. Because they're conceptual stories and they're not valid. So we can remove them. And what made it is pink go from my mind? The truth. Right? The truth. There you go. That's how you get enlightened. That's it. Very simple logic. Do you hear me? Yes. It's just that these lies are a bit deeper, that's all. And we cling to them frantically, have been for eons, Buddha says. So it takes time to rip them away. And we have to disprove them with logic, with truth. And this truth, Buddha did not make up. He is seeing it as true. 1 and 1 is 2 is true. We've agreed it's true. It's not true for its own side. It's true because we've agreed it's true. It's always been 2. Whether you call it 2 or not, it's always been 2. That's natural law. Same here. Things have always been empty of intrinsic nature. Always, Buddha says. That's its nature. It's how it is. So we have to see it, that's all, by removing the lies from our mind. That's how you become a Buddha. That's it. That's it. That's it. It's very encouraging, isn't it? So it's got nothing to do with belief. Belief's irrelevant. It's finding the truth, reality. Reality. Reality is better than truth. Truth sounds like religion. Reality. What's real? What is? What exists, you know? So the two wings of the bird go perfectly together. You could argue the point of all of this is really compassion. Because once you've got wisdom, it means you cut the misconception of a separate self. Then you just only have compassion. You have empathy. You have connectedness to others. And we can see it in our daily life. When you're feeling a bit depressed or anxious or worried or jealous, you feel separate from others. When you're feeling a bit more spacious and connected, you feel close to others. It's kind of logical. So the wisdom wing is a very specific approach to rid the mind of the misconceptions. And the compassion wing is a very distinct approach where you actively connect to others, but each helps the other. Every time you reach out to another, you're smashing ego grasping. Every time you work at ego grasping, you're connecting to others. But they've got their own distinct practices. Compassion is not enough. You can even lose bodhicitta, which is so insane, until a certain stage of development of wisdom. But once you've got wisdom, once you realize emptiness, you can't lose. That's when the final misconception has gone. The final misconception has gone. You know now there never has been, isn't and never could be an intrinsic I. That's when you realize the absence of that. It's always never been there. It's always never been there. And it's such a shock. Lama Zopa said the best yogis experience unbelievable bliss when they discover that truth. That the I they've been believing in has never been there, could never been there, and isn't there. And it's always been like that. That's truth. That's reality. And once you realize that, you cannot fall back. That's why he argues, come on in. Who is that? Open the door. Just the air. Oh, okay, come in, air. Maybe it's a spirit, who knows. So are we communicating here? Any questions, please, about these topics? Yes, Monique.
So are the methods for realizing emptiness different in the wisdom wing and the compassion wing?
No, see, that's where it gets a bit confusing, because reality is the wisdom wing. If you completed the wisdom wing without the compassion wing, you'd have to realize emptiness. So emptiness is a wisdom wing teaching. It is a Theravadan, it is a high school teaching. It's a second scope teaching. You get my point? I'm answering a question, but you get my point so far. It belongs there, but it's taught in the framework, in the Bodhisattva path, it's taught in the framework of being the perfection of the Bodhisattva, mixed with compassion. But it's a high school teaching, a Theravadan teaching. You get my point?
Is it taught differently when it's being taught in the
Well, yeah, I mean, the Theravadan schools would not have there's different, okay, when you study Buddhist tenets, you study all the different viewpoints. There's 1,000 different ways of presenting emptiness. And that's where Buddha diverged from the Hindus. So there's many different presentations of emptiness. There's many schools of thought, and so there are the views that belong to the Theravadan school. So if you study in Burma, you'll only be taught that level. If you study in Tibet, you'll learn all the levels, including the Theravadan one. Do you understand? Do you understand? So the view that we're discussing here is the one that's called the view of there's the Hinayana and Mahayana views. Then in the Hinayana you got your Vibhashika and your Satantrika, and then various views among those. I can't think of the English words. Schools of thought all laid out. And in the Mahayana you got the Chittamatra and the Madhyamika, the middle way. And then within the middle way you've got two different views: the Svatantrika and the Prasangika. And the one we're describing here is the Prasangika, which is said to be the one that's Buddha's real intent. Okay? Okay. 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 Huh? Prasangika. It means consequentialist. Consequentialist middle way view. And that's the one that we're describing in this room. I mean, I studied all the other stuff, but I've forgotten it, so I can't tell you about the others. But the key point about all the other views, at each level, they go level by level by level, more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. The Prasangika view is the only one that would say there is nothing from its own side. All the other schools say that's nihilism, and that there has to be something there that is the referent object of the word I. And that's the Prasangika view says no. That's the major difference. And each of the other schools will posit certain things that are there, that have to be there in order for there to be, even though they all have different agreements of the meaning of inherent, they have different agreements of the meaning of self-existent, there's many interpretations, but they all posit that there has to be something there. And the Prasangika says no, that's still self-existence. There can't be anything that doesn't depend on something. They all say there has to be something independent. That's the key difference. But there's different levels of them.
The other ones sound a bit easier. Would you say?
Yes, you could say that. They're hard enough. But you could say that, yes. Because the instinctive ego is to hold on to something. We feel there has to be something. There has to be something. There has to be, we believe there has to be, otherwise it feels to us like nihilism. That's why these two extreme truths, the two extreme views of nihilism and eternalism are so deeply intuitive within us. And it seems like scary as hell to say there's nothing. It doesn't make sense. We can't hear it. So we all, even the highest level, the one below the Prasangika says there's got to be something there that does exist, that is a referent object of the word I. And the Prasangika disagrees, says no. So they all have these debates, you know. Yes, Chuck.
Yes, thank you. If anxiety and depression are a product of attachment,
Yep.
how can you use these techniques to help to remove them?
Chuck, I want to burst into tears that you're asking that question. What do you think I've been saying the whole 5 days? You haven't heard any techniques in what I've said.
Well, no, I do, but
So what's missing?
I just don't. I'm trying to get how to connect the anxiety part of it to the I, you know, the lack of.
No, well, forget emptiness here.
Okay.
Forget emptiness. As you just said first, that if you realize that depression and anxiety are functions of attachment, then the question is, so all I'm trying to do here is describe that as best I can. So all you can do is do the same for yourself. And then when you start to hear, it takes time to see it, to hear it. It seems too abstract in the beginning to realize that that feeling of panic is coming because of attachment. It seems so remote for us. So all you can do is keep thinking about studying what is attachment, how it thinks what this is, what that. Then you can begin to understand how anxiety is an expression of it. That can only come with you putting this stuff into practice every day, thinking about it, observing it, understanding it, unpacking it. That's all you can do. Every day. Do you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Being your own therapist. So first control your body and speech so you can have a bit of space. Then you start to learn, you've got to study these words. I mean, I don't know that much, but the words I'm saying in this room are only coming because I've studied it. How could I have this otherwise? You know, I haven't got it out of the sky. I'm not making it up. It's only because I've studied it and then tried to think about it over my life. And every time I teach it, I'm thinking about it and processing it as I speak it. This is my internal meditation, putting it out in my words. That's how I can, I don't know much, but whatever I'm saying is coming from studying it and thinking it through and expressing it to you. Do you understand my point?
Absolutely.
That's it. That's it. And that's why if you do the other practices, like, you know, you do your mantras and you do your visualizations, they help you. They purify your mind at a very deep level. Do your purification practice. They're all like the preliminaries, the things that prime your mind to be able to get it when you think it through. Because you see, okay, well, let's just try and analyze why anxiety is linked to attachment. Attachment is this vampire, this greedy monster, panic-stricken, frantic junkie in us that can only cope with the nice things. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? So the millisecond the unnice things happen, attachment has a panic attack. It's really obvious. We freak out. Do you hear me? Yeah. That's anxiety right there. That's what it is. And then we imagine all the things that won't happen, because it's also a control freak. So you're imagining all the things that might go wrong. I might crash, the money mightn't come in, someone mightn't like me. That's all the ifs and buts of attachment. Because it's panic-stricken, wants only the nice things. It's trying to control everything. So of course you can't, so we have a panic attack again. So you can see how anxiety is based on attachment if you think of it like that. So the whole point is to catch it. As we progress, we've got to catch it before it expresses itself at the emotional level, Chuck. Then that point, that for me is like the analogy. You only know, you know, you've never heard of maintenance, you've never heard of mechanics, and you've never heard of fixing your car. So you drive it until the wheels fall off. Then you say, what'll I do about it? That's plain idiocy, isn't it? That's how we are emotionally. We wait till I want to kill you before I notice I have anger. We wait till we're hyperventilating before we realize we're anxious. It's too late at 100 miles an hour to fix your wheels. But when you have maintenance and see your mind every day, you can guarantee your wheels will never fall off. That's how I'm talking here. So it's a slow, gradual process. Get to control your body, control your speech, have discipline, live in vows, purify every day. Then it's easier to see the mind. That's your preliminary practices. Without that, forget about looking at your mind. Do you understand? And you catch it before it gets to the emotional level. You get it at the story level in your head, in your mind. Do you understand? Every day. No shortcut. Yeah.
Is there another subtle level of consciousness then that perceives the fact that we realized emptiness?
I don't quite get the question. Richard, can you say it again?
What is it that knows we realized emptiness?
Your mind. Your subtle mind. Your mind at that subtle level. It's super clear, super aware, super sharp, super accurate. You're totally conscious at that subtle level. Totally conscious.
But it's no longer associated with ourselves.
That's not the issue. That's not the point. Hmm?
That they say when you realize emptiness, it's a experience of non-duality. There's no subject-object. It's only when one arises out of that realization that one becomes aware.
I disagree. That's nonsense.
So that's what
I'm sorry. No, I beg your pardon. I'm not. That's really rude to say that. What I'm saying, forgive me. I know that, but forgive me. Wait a minute. No. Okay, wait. Sorry. Forgive me. What you're saying is right. Forgive me. I agree. But what I'm saying is, if at that moment you're sitting there realizing emptiness, don't tell me you don't know it. That's demented.
No, but you're not conscious of
I didn't say. No, of course you are conscious at that level. If you can't be conscious at that level, you're an insane person. You're conscious at whatever level you're at. You're conscious. When I no, wait. No, that's different. If you are absorbed in the absence of inherent I, then there's no subject object. I didn't say that. That's not what I'm discussing. He's asking what part of you is aware that you're aware of it. Your mind is. If you're not aware that you're doing it, then you're insane. You're mad. You're out of your brain. You're demented. It's like saying you're playing Bach. What part of you realizes you're playing Bach, or you don't know you're realizing you're playing Bach? Don't be ridiculous. We're talking different things, I think.
We're talking about an experience of non-duality.
No, he didn't. But you know you're aware of it. When you're okay, now we're discussing something different. This is not the issue. I don't want to.
All right, I'm sorry.
I totally agree with you. Not that I know anything. I'm agreeing with you. But I'm saying if once you realize, that's why Lama Zopa says you have complete bliss when you realize it. What would be the bliss if you didn't have awareness of it? You have to have the cognition. We're not disagreeing with that, okay? And I'm thinking maybe that's not his question. We're now getting to be confused.
No,
when there's no, but still, nevertheless, when you're absorbed, mind always have an object. But in that case, they say the subject and object have merged, like together. But there's still total cognition. That's called cognition. Okay, is it called cognition? It's cognition, isn't it?
There's awareness.
Thank you. There you go. That's enough. You've answered my point. That's it. No more. It's awareness. There you go. So there's awareness. But it's not conceptual and it's not dualistic. That is abstract for us. So there has to be awareness. Otherwise, you're insane.
There's awareness. But
There you
it's
go.
not aware of being aware.
Well, I didn't say that.
No.
So let's not make it complicated. Yeah. There is awareness. If there's no awareness, people often say, do you know if you're a bodhisattva? For some reason we ask that. Maybe you're not asking that one, but people often say, when you're a bodhisattva, do you know you're a bodhisattva? Well, I say, when you just played the piano, do you know you've just played the piano? When you just got the answer 1 + 1 is 2, do you know you've just got the answer? If you don't, you're insane.
But those are all dualistic.
It doesn't matter, it's cognition. I don't care, children. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about cognition at the subtlest or the grossest level. If there's cognition, you're aware of it. That necessarily has to be, otherwise you're a mad person. There is cognition. Maybe that's put that way. Not dualistic, I'm not saying that. It's cognition. So when you're working in your mind at a subtle level, and you're doing the analysis, and then the penny drops, that's the awareness. And then what you'll do, you'll stop the analysis, and you'll absorb yourself in that cognition. So that's non-dualistic. It's right, but it's still cognition. That's all I'm saying. It's still cognition. No more, no less. Would you agree with that? It's still cognition.
Yeah.
That's it. We're agreeing now. I think. Are you understanding what I'm saying?
I think so.
I mean, I think we get so complicated when we start talking about non-dualistic and dualistic and this and that and merge and blah. If there is the mind functioning and it's cognizing something, then there is awareness of that. That's simply. I'm not putting dualistic like the separate self-watching. I didn't say that. But awareness, cognition itself is cognition.
Your question has to do.
So say your question again. No, wait, let's just wait. What's your question again?
Oh, well, my question was there another subtle level of consciousness that is aware when we understand the nature of...
Okay, so that's like a separate part. No, it doesn't need to be. I mean, that's why I keep it simple at any level of cognition. Don't make it complicated because it's emptiness, you know. If you are holding the cup that you have a cognition that you're doing it. Now, much of the time, because we're so stupid, we blindly do things and there's no awareness. But when you've got awareness, then whatever you're aware of, you're aware. Awareness is, by definition, awareness. You don't need another part to be aware. That's schizophrenic. There's awareness. Whether it's emptiness or not doesn't matter for me. It doesn't matter, children, really and truly. Cognition is cognition, and if it's valid, it's valid. And there doesn't need to be a separate piece that tells you it's valid, which is sort of what you're asking. No, of course not. Awareness is awareness. Awareness is my eye consciousness sees that color and my cognition says it's blue. That's an awareness. And as I'm saying it, if it's conscious, then it's an awareness. That's it. Much of the time we're blind as bats and don't know what we're doing because we're not aware, because we're so ignorant. And that's what delusions, that's the suffering of an animal mind. We've got that when we've got delusions. There's no awareness, even though the mind is still cognizing something. We're so thick in our delusions. But when the mind is sharp and clear and brilliant, oh my goodness, there's utter, complete, blissful awareness. You don't need another piece to tell you that you're aware, is what you're asking in a sense, isn't he?
No, I don't think. Well,
that's what he said. Is there a subtler?
Like
he just said, is there a subtle consciousness? That's all. No, of course you don't need that. Why would you have that? Say more. Is that what you mean?
I think you explained it.
Okay.
But there's not another seer or.
But why would that, so ask? Why would you need to be? Let's just say you're.
Like, when you're.
Go on.
Like when you're sitting, you're aware that you're.
Can we keep it ordinary? As soon as we talk meditation, people get very weird, We get very strange. We're sick of ordinary experiences, whatever level of cognition. I'm not talking about non-dualistic cognition now. I'm just talking about the mind cognizing something.
But you're always aware that you're aware, you're seeing something.
Well, that's the nature of awareness. That's the nature of awareness. When you're playing the piano and you know the theory and you're playing the piano, you're aware you're playing, and then you're aware when you make a mistake. That's why you change. That's called awareness. That's called based on proper theory. You're aware you're doing it. Simple level of awareness. You don't need another part of you to tell you that you're aware. So whether you're realizing emptiness or realizing playing the piano, it's just a subtle level of awareness. So what point the children's making is when you're when you're absorbed in emptiness, when you're absorbed in the realization of the non-self-existence of whatever it is, then that's just absorption in it. There's no duality and there's no conceptuality there, but that still is simply bare awareness. You're not asleep, in other words. There is clear cognition. You don't need another part of your mind to tell you that way. That is what we're saying. Do you understand? But at ordinary level, it functions like that too. You don't need another part of your mind to tell you that you played the right piece of piano. When you've got the theory clear and you do the work and you're whizzing along the piano, there's awareness at that time you're doing it. If you're not, you're asleep. Schizophrenic, mad. Can you see my point? Are we communicating, children?
There are some tenant systems that assert.
I know there are. There's one that says there's one called that self. What's it called? What's it called? That's Shitamatri. What's it called? Where's Wana? What's it called? There's the one. That's what they call it. There is one that says that.
Asserts it, but then you have the fault of. Then there has to be another one.
Seeing that and go for eternity. And this is the complicated talk we get so involved in, And I remember His Holiness talking about the mind. But you can say these words, but to really have an experience of mind is really that difficult because it's not. You can't touch it, smell it, taste it. It's quite incredible, really. It's fascinating. But it doesn't need a separate piece. That's what cognition is. Clear, valid cognition. It does its own job. And that's almost the idea of a creator, or a soul or something, a self that's watching and doing it. Do you understand? That isn't there. Don't need it, Buddha says. We're communicating, aren't we, children? Yeah.
For example, you have the eye that's apprehending the cup.
Say it again, what?
You have the eye that says consciousness.
Yes.
Apprehending the cup.
Yeah.
But
Apprehending shape and colour.
Yeah. But then you also know that you're apprehending the cup.
That's your mental consciousness. No, eye consciousness, it's your mental consciousness, isn't it? That's mental consciousness, isn't it?
It's not the self-knower.
What?
It's not a self-knower.
We're not discussing a self-knower.
Yeah.
So, there's more than one part of your mind working, isn't it? So when I'm sitting at the piano, and even when as long as your mind is working, you've also got, even that, also your mind is made of many parts. This is the point. So there's one lot of in the grouping of all the parts of our mind, in the mechanics of the mind, as I like to call it, there are 5 parts of our mind working all the time, even in the cognition of emptiness. It's not just, there's just this kind of one mind. You've got intention, you've got attention, you have discrimination, you have feeling. There's 5 different things always there, as well as others. There's a half a dozen, 10 maybe parts of your mind, even at the subtlest level of cognition. As long as mind is functioning, they are there. So it's more than just one part of your mind watching something, you know. It's much more complex. There's many parts of your mind all working together to have an experience of cognition. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
So,
huh?
So all those different parts, would that explain, say, for example, when you're playing the piano and you're just lost in it and you're not necessarily...
Yeah, when you've got it, when you've perfected it, they're all working, but it's so like, you know, my hand, because I haven't got a stroke, my hand is familiar with what to do. All my fingers, all the ligaments, all the muscles are working completely spontaneously. But if I had to learn to do it again, look at the hard work. Each finger does its job, move this, I've got to be so conscious. When you've practiced at perfection, your hand knows what to do. Same with your mind, it's so spontaneous. Then you could say, that's what we mean by instinct. When you've learned that piano so completely, it's beyond conceptuality, isn't it? You've just perfected it. So your mind is just, but all the millions of bits of your mind are all still working. And so there is a general awareness, but also there's discrimination. The discrimination is working because you're so familiar, you know exactly that wrong note. The tiniest wrong note was in there. You did the exact half a second too short or something. That's all there as well. This discrimination is so brilliant. It's working second by second, knowing exactly what's going on, even though it's so spontaneous. I mean, the parts of our mind are so amazing. There's intention, there's mindfulness, not forgetting what you're doing. There's feeling, there's all these bits and pieces, all doing their work together. In every cognition we have. We're just not aware of any of them, you know. Very interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Can I just clarify whether it's correct what I'm thinking? So when you focus on the clarity of the mind and you have a very strong concentration like shamatha, you're basically aware of your mind in its natural state, right? But that's not enough to realize emptiness, because what you need to add on it, you need to add the understanding what was wrong before.
No, the way Lama talks, all I can do is quote Lama Yeshe, who's the expert. I'm not the expert. You're focusing. The first meditation, the first mode is concentration, and your attention is paying attention to the mind, and then eventually when it settles, that's what they say is you're focusing on the clarity of the mind. That's its conventional nature. And then when you're ready, as Panchen Lama says, a subtle wisdom. You've got control over your mind, so you can conjure a subtle wisdom. And Lama says eventually Lama says this subtle wisdom that is like a fish moving through water without disturbing it. So you don't disturb the concentration. You stay focused on the mind, but it's out of the corner of your eye. You're noticing something else, but you're still paying attention to your mind. And that he calls it the mindfulness fish. It's so sweet. And that's like this subtle fish moving through, and it's watching like a hawk to check for the way our sense of an independent self feels. And it's trying to catch that. And because your mind's more subtle, it becomes super capable of doing that. And the moment you catch it, the way it appears, you then stop, you then focus on that experience of non-duality. And then it'll waver, and you go back to you go back to the focusing on the mind again. So it's a similar, the other way that it's taught, not the Mahamudra way, the typical way you combine the 2 modes of meditation. You got your concentration on whatever object. Then you take the topic that you want to think about, and now you use the concentration at that subtle level. It's stable and clear, and now you go to the second mode, which is analysis, and you will think through think about dependent arising, and that thinking will trigger the aha moment. Oh, I got it. And you'll stop the analysis immediately, and you'll revert to the concentration mode, but on that experience. The feeling, and that's what gets deeper and deeper and deeper until one day you get the direct cognition of the non-existence of the independent I. So the Mahamudra is a bit of a different method. You have to read Lama's book to see. You stay on the mind, And then the subtle fish, as he calls it, the mindfulness fish is watching for the way I arise. It's very experiential. It's not intellectual. You're not doing analysis of dependent arising. In the traditional way, you're doing analysis of dependent using words, but at a subtle level, you're thinking through this because of this, therefore this, and therefore this. It can't be this and that. And then suddenly the penny drops and you grab it, you get an experience. You stop then and you focus on that experience. In this one, you stay on the mind, and then you do no. There's no analysis involved. It's just watching for the I to arise. There's no analysis at all. So it's a different way of using the two modes of meditation. Do you agree with that, Jordan, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah, so the last bit was that you have this experience of how the I arises, and before, as you had studied before, you now see that it's wrong, and that's the absence.
No, okay. You see, yeah, the way Lama puts it, what you're doing, he says, okay, you're watching for the way the I rises, the watching for the way it feels. And that's how we should be doing it every day, catching it like a hawk, waiting like this thief catching up to us and grabbing the way the I appears as something independent of the label I, something independent of everything. That's when you see how that appears. And the more accurate you see how the I appears like that, and you know it isn't that way, that's when you realize emptiness. So Lama says, Tsongkhapa says, when you really see accurately how it doesn't exist, when you really see accurately how it appears to be something existing from its own side, at that second you've identified it, and that second you realize emptiness of it. That second. That's what he says. That's why for me, even ordinary life, looking at ordinary delusions like attachment, it functions in the same way. It believes in something that doesn't exist. So the more you think through the way attachment functions, you know, like if you're in love with somebody and you try to analyze the insanity of the attachment story that believes in all those things about that person, when you realize that what you get when attachment, we believe when attachment gets its object, then we'll get happy. But when you realize that attachment, when you get the object, you wouldn't get what attachment thinks it would get because it doesn't exist. That's the way you do analysis, how the lie isn't seeing accurately. When you know accurately that it's a lie, that's the realization. When you know accurately that what you get isn't what attachment thinks it would get. That's even just with attachment. When you know accurately that the cake is not the object that attachment thinks is there. What is there is not what the attachment thinks is there. Same kind, and that's why at a simpler level, using the ordinary delusions, because they all function in the same way. They're all exactly the same in making up something. And then it's easier to understand how the subtle I doesn't, the independent I doesn't exist. The delicious cake doesn't exist. The ugly ex-boyfriend doesn't exist. Do the same type of analysis. Observe what anger thinks exists, and then observe how it doesn't exist. Then you realize anger's a liar. This is why it's so helpful in daily life, analyzing all the ordinary delusions, you know. Ordinary level of, you know, the way that Buddha says we have to look for it. And the first of the four, in the typical 4-point analysis, the first step is we have to recognize accurately what it is we think the I would be if it did exist. This is the hardest part. And this is what you try to do in Mahamudra as well, watching it. Without analysis. There's no analysis. But here is analysis. So you have to recognize all the time. And they say this is the hardest one. When you can recognize in your life, in your day, every time something goes wrong, every time someone attacks you, you grab it and see that opportunity to catch how the I that we think is independent, how we think it exists like that. It's only then that we can do the analysis of how then realizing it's either oneness, either two ways it can exist. It either exists as a separate thing, like we did the analysis of this one, or it exists as oneness with. And then you're able to do that analysis. Once you've discovered what it is, you do the searching for it. But you can't search for it until you've identified what you think it is. You have to first identify what you think it is, and then you can do the searching. And then you finally, either, as Dalai Lama says, you either come up with an I and you throw it out, or you come up with no I. Either way, no choice. All of this really is quite sophisticated thinking, and it all implies we've got control over our mind. I mean, if you're so overwhelmed by all your delusions, and as soon as someone says one bad word to you and you burst into tears and anger and suffer for the next 6 months, it's impossible to even begin to identify. So even just to watch your mind and catch what's there implies so much discipline, so much awareness of the mind, so much control over your body and speech, because we're overwhelmed normally just by the emotions. We just run with the emotions. Then you've missed the opportunity. So it implies so much practice already to even begin to do this. So much control over our body, speech and mind, you know. So much merit, in other words. Because as Lama Zopa says, which sounds so shocking initially, that the vast majority of all humans on the planet have absolutely no idea, and he's talking to intelligent people too, have no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. We're so schizophrenic. We believe it's all out there. We have no idea that what goes on in here has any role in our lives. That really is insanity. And that's a shocking thing to say, but that's the Buddha's point. So even to begin to own that what you're thinking is what causes you to be suffering and happy is already incredible. And then to have enough stability where bad things can happen, which is the time ego rises, so that you are happy that it's arising because it's an opportunity to catch the delusions. That's advanced. We just get caught up in the story and start arguing, and that's the end of it, gone, you know. So this is so amazing to be able to do it. Because ego is so instinctive to grasp and feel sorry for itself. Then it's too late. Are we communicating, people? Lunchtime, okay.